So glad to see all of you. And we're here not for a Murch presentation, but for a Coombs presentation. But I know there's some Murches lurching in there somewhere. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dana.
Ooh, can everybody hear me? Okay, good. So today, the origins of Anthony Coombs, or DNA doesn't lie, but family genealogists do. Anthony Wells. Okay. Okay. That's cool. All right. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Anthony Coombs was a blacksmith who came to Wells, Maine in 1685. The descendants of Anthony Coombs are among the earliest settlers of both Islesboro and Vinalhaven, coming during the era of just before and just after the Revolutionary War. And his descendants have been numerous in Belfast since the early 1800s. In this talk, I will explore the many origin stories of Anthony Coombs and how a recent DNA study has separated fact from fiction. And I will also discuss the many pitfalls of using secondary sources doing genealogy. So how many people, show of hands, how many people here are Coombs descendants or are married to a Coombs descendant? Okay, good. So we will start with sort of what's known. This is a book called The Genealogical Dictionary of Maine and New Hampshire. If you're working on a family that has ancestors that were in Maine prior to 1700, this is the place you start. It isn't infallible, but it's the place you start. And it was published serially beginning in 1928. So this is what most people know about Anthony Coombs. This book is available at many ancestry sites online, and it's free. So a lot of people have seen this. And it's written in a shorthand, so I'll have to read through it so you can get it. Anthony Coombs, blacksmith, apprentice of Lewis Allen. Apprentice brought to Wells with him, that means with Allen. By early tradition, Anthony's parents, French, gave him to monks to be made a priest. But as he got an English Bible, he ran away. When Lewis Allen left Wells, he left Anthony Coombs on his land. Anthony then married in Wells in 1688 Dorcas Wooden. Lewis Allen, blacksmith, bought in Wells in 1685 a house and shipping, I'm assuming that means like a shipping wharf, and built a mill. In 1704, he had removed to Annapolis Royal, and the French governor there sent him to the English to exchange prisoners. In 1720, he and his wife Margaret were still there, and as late as 1733, he visited Wells. So let's start out by, I'll tell you something about the family of Anthony Coombs and Dorcas Wooden. The little numbers here are a convention that genealogists knew to separate generations. So I'm calling him first generation. Anthony and Dorcas Wooden had 11 children, 9 of whom lived to marry. Dorcas was a native of Rowley, Massachusetts. Second generation, Anthony Coombs married Mercy Hodgkins of Gloucester. They had children born at Gloucester and then at Falmouth, which is today Portland, before finally moving to New Meadows, which is now part of Brunswick, in 1739. There are 3 of their children that we're interested in here. I'll start with Mercy. Mercy married Samuel Williams and remained in the Harpswell area. Our own Jill Grove Harvey is a descendant of Mercy Coombs and her husband, Samuel Williams. Next is Sylvanus, the brother of Mercy. He moved to from New Meadows to Georgetown, where he married Martha Walker and purchased a 212-acre peninsula along the Kennebec River called Foster's Point. I still have relatives with a camp at Foster's Point. The son of Sylvanus, another Anthony, they love the name Anthony, moved to Vassalboro in 1775 and married there Anna Stinson. Our own Debbie Littlefield Bird is a descendant of Anthony and his wife, Anna. We are thicker than fleas, as they say. And another Anthony, this in the third generation, the brother of Mercy and Sylvanus, married Ruth Getchell of Scarborough. And to just make this more confusing, the 1790 census, which was the first census in the US, which listed the head of household by name, there were 4 people in Maine, head of households, named Anthony Coombs. And it is really difficult to separate all of them. During the Revolutionary War, third generation Anthony Coombs served as the first lieutenant in the 2nd Cumberland County Regiment of Massachusetts Militia and was also a member of the Harpswell Committee of Correspondence. Following the end of the Revolutionary War in 1783, this Anthony Coombs, along with 4 of his sons, moved from Harpswell to Islesboro. 2 of those sons are of interest to us here. So I put Anthony and Ruth Getchell up at the top. And I'll start with another Anthony. If you're counting, I think that's 4 in a row. Anthony Coombs, 4th generation, married Hannah Williams of Harpswell, joined his father and his brothers in moving to Islesboro in 1783. In 1825, his daughter, Lois, married Lewis Cobb Murch of Castine. Lois and Lewis later moved to Belfast, where Lewis and his sons operated a pump and block making business. My sister Sandra and I are descended from Lois Coombs and Lewis Cobb Murch. The other son of Anthony, Robert Coombs, also moved to Islesboro. His son, who was also a robber, married Islesboro native Jane Pendleton Gilkey. Jane had Gilkey and Pendleton ancestors who were among the earliest settlers of Islesboro, and it's said that the Pendletons are thicker than fleas today on Islesboro. Robert and Jane had 14 children, born between 1824 and 1849, as a consequence of which Jane was either pregnant or nursing for at least 28 consecutive years. Late in life, Robert and his wife Jane moved to Belfast, where they had a farm. The next generation, Robert Hudson Coombs, was born on Islesboro in 1828, married a Pendleton and moved to Belfast, where he became a ship captain. According to his 1897 obituary, Captain Coombs visited nearly every habitable portion of the globe. After retiring, he ran a furniture business in Belfast, trained horses, and in 1884 built a roller skating rink in a building between High Street and Union Street. Robert and his wife, Harriet Pendleton, had 2 sons. Son Charles Robert Coombs started the Coombs Funeral Home in Belfast. The other son, Walter Hudson Coombs, ran an antique business in Belfast and reportedly was an expert in identifying and restoring genuine antiques as opposed to the fake ones. Through Walter Hudson Coombs, Frank Hudson Coombs III, who is here, is a descendant. So now we can explore all the various origin. Excuse me? Oh, well, I did the one that mattered. Yeah. So we can explore now the various genealogical stories. And the first question is, well, how many published stories of the origins of the earliest Anthony Coombs are there? A lot. The first was 1908, a book called The Genealogical and Personal Memoirs Relating to the Families of Boston and Eastern Massachusetts. A year later, The Genealogical and Family History of the State of Maine. And then 3 books written by Coombs' descendants. 1913, The Story of Anthony Coombs and His Descendants. 1927, Ancestor Anthony Coombs and Descendants. 1997, Soldier in Exile. And then there were you go online and you'll find all kinds of family trees for Coombses. So to begin with the genealogical and personal memoirs relating to the families of Boston and Eastern Massachusetts. And you'll see, it's hard to read, but this author, William Richard Cutter, is historian at the New England Historical Genealogical Society. So he's got some credentials. And this is what the book says about Coombs. There are various traditions regarding the immigrant ancestor of the Coombs family here considered. One running to the effect that the family is of Scotch origin, while another has it that the main branches come chiefly from French ancestry. In the history of Brunswick, Maine, it is written that the name of the father of the first of the family in that vicinity is not known, but that he was a Frenchman who settled first in Plymouth, that would be Plymouth, Massachusetts, and afterward lived at Newburyport, and that he is known to have had sons Peter, Anthony, and John. There were among those of the Coombs surname in New England during the first half of the 17th century, and the name itself has the Scotch sound rather than the French, while the Christian names running through the earlier generations are both Scotch and English rather than French. So then it has Anthony Coombs, son of an unnamed Coombs, born probably at New Meadows, removed to Islesboro, where he died in 1815 at the age of 100. In 1789, he was a town officer. His wife, Ruth, died in 1826, having borne 7 sons and 2 daughters. And it names the sons. Now, this is the introduction to that work, which actually ran 4 volumes. The present work, which I won't repeat, it's too long, presents in the aggregate an amount and variety of genealogical and personal information and portraiture unequaled in any kindred publication. Indeed, no similar work concerning this region has ever before been presented. It contains a vast amount of ancestral history never before printed. The object, clearly defined and well digested, was threefold. First, to present in concise form the history of established families of Boston and its immediate vicinity and Eastern Massachusetts. Second, to preserve a record of their prominent present-day people. Third, to present through personal sketches linked with the genealogical narrative the relation of the prominent families of all times to the growth, singular prosperity, and widespread influence of the historic old city of Boston and the region belonging to it by historical association and community of interest. Unique in conception and treatment, this work constitutes one of the most original and permanently valuable contributions ever made to the social history of an American community. In it are arrayed in a lucid and dignified manner all the important facts regarding the ancestry, personal career, and matrimonial alliances of many of those who, in each succeeding generation, have been accorded leading positions in the social, professional, and business life of Boston and the surrounding region. Anyone have any comments or observations on that? I mean, what's that?
Very modest.
Very modest, yeah. Clearly, this was a work that was concentrated on the prominent men, no women allowed, of the day when this was published. If you were a farmer and your ancestors were farmers, you were not going to get in this book. But if you had ancestors who were doctors or lawyers or clergymen, especially, they were going to get here, because those were the kinds of people who upheld the promise of Massachusetts. And then we go to the state of Maine. Genealogical and Family History of the State of Maine in 4 volumes by George Thomas Little, who is librarian of Bowdoin College, all under the auspices of the Reverend Henry Burridge, who was the state of Maine historian. Again, great credentials. So I'll read what it says here about Coombs. The large majority of the members of the Coombs family in the New England states, and of those which are so widely scattered over the West, trace their origins to a sturdy ancestor, Anthony Coombs, who was born in France about 1656 and came to America about 1674, landing at Plymouth, Massachusetts. From thence he moved to New Meadows, near Brunswick, buying a large tract of land of the Indians. Being driven from thence by the savages, he removed to Massachusetts, where he died. But some of his children returned to the lands in Maine and became, like those of the family who remained in Massachusetts, the ancestors of many noble, patriotic men and women. All records for our country's struggles for liberty being starred many times with the names of Coombs patriots. The name of the Coombs ancestor at New Meadows is spelled Alistair in the old records. He was married September 5, 1688 to Dorcas Wooden. And it goes on. This ancestor, Anthony Coombs, is said to have been one of the best French families, and by his father was designed for a priest. But his noble spirit revolted at the restrictions laid upon the priesthood. He soon found that an old friend of his had a portion of the English Bible, which he diligently read in secret. How someone born in France knew English is not clear to me, but he was so impressed by the sincerity and faith of this old man and by what he read in the Bible that he determined to become an earnest Christian, though he knew the discovery of this purpose meant death for him. At length he ventured to talk about this with his mother and found that she held the same ideas, which made his life have such a new meaning. She aided him with money and means to escape on a vessel to America, though she knew well that she might never again look upon the face of this beloved son. No wonder that with such an ancestry as this, the members of the Coombs family through long generations have been men and women of noblest thought and Christian faith. Not to put too fine a point on it, but they're not even calling Catholics Christians. So there's the anti-Catholic bias here is in your face. This is the introduction to the main book. The present work presents in the aggregate an amount and variety of genealogical and personal information and portraiture unequaled by any kindred publication. Indeed, no similar work concerning Maine families has ever been presented. It contains a vast amount of ancestral history never before printed. The object clearly defined, go through those, they sound a little familiar. Unique in conception and treatment, this work constitutes one of the most original and permanently valuable contributions ever made to the social history of an American Commonwealth. In it are arrayed in a lucid and dignified manner all the important facts regarding the ancestry, personal careers, and matrimonial alliances of those who in each succeeding generation have been accorded leading positions in the social, professional, and business life of the state. Does that sound like the one we just read? Yeah. So these people knew each other. They were doing the same kind of thing for both Massachusetts and Maine at almost the same time. Okay.
Publication dates close.
Yeah, within a year of each other. And this continues on and gives you a flavor for where the information in the main book came from. Out of these considerations, the authors and publishers have received encouragement and approval of authorities of the highest standing as genealogists, historians, and literators. In the production of this work, no pains have been spared to ensure absolute truth, that quality upon which its value in every feature depends. The material comprising the genealogical and personal records of the active living, as well as of the honored dead, have been gathered by men and women experienced in such work and acquainted with local history and ancestral families. These have appealed with confidence to the custodians of family records concerning the useful men of preceding generations and of their descendants who have lived useful and honorable lives. Let's say you're a farmer. Such custodians who have availed themselves of this opportunity of having this knowledge placed in preservable and accessible form have performed a public service in rendering honor to whom honor is due, and preserving the distinction which rightfully belongs to the colonial families and which distinguishes them from later immigrations, and in inculcating the most valuable and enduring lessons of patriotism and good citizenship. So remember, genealogists are a product of their times. This was published in 1909, a time of unbridled belief in American manifest destiny, that the United States was divinely ordained to spread white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant-based democracy and capitalism across the American continent and indeed the world. And that, you can hear it there. But they looked diligently. And, you know, that story we just heard about Anthony Coombs coming from France and going to Plymouth, that's the truth. So now we get into stories of Anthony written by descendants. This is the first one by William Carey Coombs, written in 1913. This is also available all over the internet and gets quoted all the time. The author described his effort as follows. We have chosen to tell the life of immigrant Anthony Coombs in the form of a story based on family traditions and facts discovered. This has been carefully and conscientiously done, and only after years of investigation, much correspondence, and examination of records in the public libraries of Cincinnati and Boston, we have tried to make truth in every statement. So, here is a synopsis using the author's words where I could of his story of immigrant Anthony Coombs. My story begins in the vine-clad fields of sunny France. Picture yourself, a well-to-do French family in the 17th century. The father, a man of stern, uncompromising nature, a firm Roman Catholic. The mother, a gentle-spirited and thrifty housewife. And son, Antoine, Anthony in English, born about 1642. The time soon comes when the father says Antoine must be prepared to serve the church as a priest. So Antoine is placed in the care of an abbot and monks of a nearby monastery. But Antoine soon discovers that these supposedly holy men were often inconsistent in their pretensions, their habit gross, and their learning unnatural and circumscribed. A pious old servant of the abbot opened Antoine's eyes to the English Bible. As the light broke upon him, Antoine saw that his conscience would not tolerate the thought of becoming a teacher of such a religion. Could he be a heretic? In France, Huguenots were French Protestants and they were the heretics. Better a heretic than a hypocrite. To whom should he go? His mother, who met him with sympathy and advice. He must flee to America, that refuge opened for the oppressed and persecuted. And so 17-year-old Antoine Coombs left for America with his mother's blessing and a box of her frugal savings. Where did Antoine go? Most likely tradition says he landed at Boston about 1660 and from there went to Salem. Then, to escape persecution as a Catholic, Antoine Coombs changed his name to Alistair Coombs, nice Scottish, strong Scottish name. Passed him off as a Scotsman. Alistair Coombs and others then moved to Maine and bought land near New Meadows, but were driven back to Massachusetts during King Philip's War in 1675. In 1688, Anthony Coombs, how we get from Alistair to Anthony isn't clear to me, then about 46 years old, married Dorcas Wooden of Salem. Anthony and Dorcas then lived for a time at Salem and Wenham before moving to Rochester, where Anthony built an ironworks and lived out his days. I think it's fair to say that that author did not want to have an ancestor who was a Roman Catholic. So seems to have gone to some extraordinary lengths to make sure that that Roman Catholic became Protestant. But be that as it may. The second genealogy by a descendant of Anthony Coombs was published in 1827. It's 300 pages long by the Reverend Charles Nelson Sennett. Sennett was a congregational minister who was born in Harpswell and who wrote over 125 family histories and genealogies of New England families. So go to the Maine State Library and there's just a ton of these things. His genealogy repeats the origin story of Anthony Coombs that was told in the earlier book. Cites research that Anthony may have arrived in Boston in 1651 on a ship bearing Scottish prisoners of war from the English Civil War, who were then to be sold as indentured servants, hence the name change to the Scottish first name of Alistair. And this is all true. There were, in fact, many Scottish soldiers who were captured during the English Civil War, shipped to Boston. Some went to found the ironworks in Saugus, and some went to South Berwick, what is now South Berwick, Maine, to rebuild a sawmill there. And there's a settlement called Unity, which is where the Scottish settlers were in South Berwick. Unity was the name of the ship that came on. So, I mean, it did happen. Sennett also cites oral family tradition that had Anthony as one of three brothers from France who settled on the Maine coast. And the ancestry line that he has is Anthony 1 to Peter 2 to Anthony 3 to Anthony 4 to Lois, who married the Murch. And that's not the line that I have, so raises some questions there. And the third genealogy by a descendant was published in 1997, Neil Coombs. And here's what the author says about what he was doing. The purpose of this paper was to synthesize, integrate, and to reconcile all of the available and sometimes inconsistent historical information about Alistair Coombs and to explain it as a logical, parsimonious whole. In order to accomplish this task, the public records of the state of Maine were diligently searched. Old newspaper articles, deeds, magazines, diaries, church records, letters, archives, collections, local traditions, ship's logs, and historical documents and manuscripts of all kinds were tracked down over a period of 20 years and consulted. Well, it sounds like someone's actually doing some research. It's not clear in the first two works, which were compilations of families, how much original research was done. And there are no footnotes. So, you'll never find a good genealogist citing those works as sources. They may be right, but there's lots of occasions where they aren't. So they're not trustworthy. But this guy sounds like he was going to do the right thing. So here's my synopsis of the 1997 story of Anthony Coombs. Yes. Mm-hmm. Neil is, I've not researched his line, but he's a Coombs descendant of Anthony. Yep. Soldier in Exile tells the story of Alistair Coombs, a 20-year-old Scottish soldier and prisoner of war after the Battle of Dunbar during the English Civil War, who arrived in Boston in 1651 on the ship John and Sarah, and was put up for sale along with his fellow prisoners as an indentured servant. Alistair was of the gentry class, as he had studied in France for a career in the army and could read, write, and do sums, and probably speak French. Because there were no buyers, for these prisoners to be found in Boston. They were all set free by the captain of the John and Sarah before he sailed back to England. Alistair soon met and later married Tabitha Stevens, the daughter of a local Presbyterian minister who had plans to move his congregation to Nova Scotia to escape the Puritans of Massachusetts Bay Colony. Nova Scotia had been originally settled as Acadia by the French, but the English kicked them out in 1713, and then when James came, King James of the Sixth of Scotland became King James the First of England, they changed the name of Nova Scotia to, Acadia to Nova Scotia, New Scotland. While en route to Nova Scotia in 1652, the ship carrying Alistair and Tabitha put in at New Meadows for repairs. Alistair and Tabitha joined other members of the congregation in settling at New Meadows, where Alistair bought land from a local Indian station. Alistair and Tabitha had a son, Anthony, born at New Meadows about 1665. Then came King Philip's War, which is really the first colonial war. Yes?
Said that Anthony left his home at 17. Now you're saying he left at 20, which is right. Could you repeat that, please, for the folks on Zoom?
All right, can you hear me now?
So these are all, I'm summarizing what these books have said. They clearly are inconsistent with each other.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
You're summarizing now.
The information that you're summarizing now, in the cover page said he had gone and searched deeds and
Mhm.
so on and so forth. Was all of, so with the first part of this information, were there citations for what he stated or not?
There are no citations in any of the 5 works that I've.
So there
Talk
were
about-
no citations for this, even though he said he had searched deeds and church records and
Correct.
diaries. Okay.
Correct. And that doesn't mean he's wrong.
Correct.
I mean, one of the preeminent genealogists in Maine, Walter Goodwin Davis, who's still cited today by eminent genealogists, didn't have citations for anything, but he was right every time when you go check it out. Alistair and Tabitha were killed during an Indian attack on New Meadows on September the 3rd, 1675, at which time 10-year-old Anthony and a brother were captured and taken to Canada. In 1686, 11 years later, Anthony made his escape. He was by then fluent in French, but not in English. Anthony eventually made his way to Salem on foot. 2 years later, September the 5th, 1688, he married Dorcas Wooden at York, Essex County, Massachusetts. Actually in Wells, Maine, but who's paying attention to details? Anthony and his growing family lived for a time in Salem, Newburyport, Cape Ann, Wenham, Beverly, Gloucester, and finally Rochester, all in Massachusetts. Well, that's a good story. And it's supposed to be true. So put all this together and summarize. Here are the various origin stories for Anthony Coombs. That he was born in Scotland in 1642, or in France in 1656, or in Maine in 1665. That he was a refugee from the Catholic priesthood or a refugee from captivity in Quebec. That he immigrated to Boston in 1651 or 1660, or to Plymouth, Mass in 1674. That Anthony Coombs was the same person as Alistair Coombs. Antoine Coombs was the same person as Alistair Coombs, who was the same person as Anthony Coombs. Or that Anthony was the son of Alistair Coombs, a Scottish soldier captured during the English Civil War and exiled to Boston. Well, these can't all be true, right? Some of them are mutually exclusive. And there's more. You go on the internet, Many families on Ancestry claim that Anthony Coombs was a descendant of John Coombs, who immigrated to Plymouth Colony in 1630 and married a daughter of Mayflower passenger Degory Priest. Other sources have speculated that this Anthony Coombs, the one who settled in Islesboro, was a descendant or a near relative of Henry Coombs, who had land laid out to him at Marblehead, Mass. In 1648. Okay, what's true? Drum roll. Not a blessed one. Anthony Coombs was not born in Scotland in 1642, or in France in 1656, or in Maine in 1665. He was not a refugee from the Catholic priesthood, not a refugee from captivity in Quebec, did not immigrate to Boston in 1651 or 1660, or to Plymouth in 1674. Antoine Coombs was not the same person as Alistair Coombs, who was not the same person as Anthony Coombs, and he was not the son of Alistair, a Scottish soldier, captured during the Civil War and exiled to Boston. Nor was he a descendant of John Coombs of Plymouth Colony, nor was he a descendant or a near relative of Henry Coombs, who had land laid out to him at Marblehead, Mass. In 1648. So over the course of just over 100 years, 5 published works, 2 of which, have the authors have eminent credentials, got the story completely wrong. We do know that there was an Anthony Coombs who married Dorcas Wood. That's a fact. We got a marriage record. That's it. So how do I know all of these are wrong? Well, a few years ago, some descendants of Anthony Coombs and Dorcas Wooden had a theory. And they wanted to explore that theory using DNA. So they conducted what's called a Y-DNA test. Y-DNA is passed from father to son. So a Y-DNA study, which is also called a surname study, needs a straight line of male descendants. A total of 7 men participated in the study. 4 were known descendants of the Anthony Coombs who married Dorcas Wooden. 3 others were known descendants of 3 other men. And they used an Ancestry 46 marker DNA test. They all had the same haplogroup, which sort of means that we don't have some outliers from some other family. And the genetic distance on all 46 markers for these 7 men ranged between 0 and 2 for all the participants. So that means you had 9th or 10th generation descendants of Anthony Coombs and 3 other men who had virtually identical DNA. 99.55% probability that they shared an ancestor within 12 generations. And because they knew the ancestry of the men other than Anthony Coombs, they knew who that common ancestor was. And they had to go to a rather surprising place. I won't pronounce this in French because I'm not good at that. But in English, this is the Genealogical Dictionary of Acadian Families. This is for the 17th century French families who settled in Acadia, what the Mayflower silver books are for Mayflower descendants. It's the Bible. The common ancestor of all of those DNA men was Pierre Como. Pierre was a tonnelier, a barrel maker from France, who immigrated to Port Royal, which was the Acadian settlement there, founded in 1604. He was there sometime before 1650, by which time he had married Rose Bayon. The 6th child in the bottom, Antoine, born about 1661, who then shows up in a couple of census records and disappears from Acadia. So now I can tell the right story. Antoine Como was born at Port Royal in about 1661, the son of Pierre and Rose. He accompanied fellow Acadian Louis Elan to Wells, Maine in 1685 as an apprentice blacksmith. Their names were then anglicized to Anthony Coombs and Lewis Allen. Lewis Allen returned to Port Royal in 1687, leaving Anthony on his land in Wells, Maine. 1666, Anthony was then 27 years old and married 17-year-old Dorcas Wooden at Wells, Maine. The family moved permanently to Massachusetts in 1704 during the French and Indian Wars. And there's a sixth Coombs genealogy, published in 2019 by Whitney John Coombs, with whom I corresponded while he was in the process of writing this book. And he tells the correct story and talks about the DNA evidence. And this is my gift to the library. And this is a map from that book that shows the towns in Massachusetts where Anthony and Dorcas lived, where their children were baptized as the family moved around during the French and Indian Wars. So the moral is, DNA doesn't lie, but family genealogists sure do. There you have it.
Are we actually real, or are we just a figment of things?
Oh, we're real. We're real. Questions, comments? This was, once I had heard what the answer was, and then figured out all these different families that a number of us are related to, it made sense to put together a presentation and talk about how wrong people were for how long. Even saying that they did a good job. It's hard to believe. So I love this stuff.
Going back to all of the Anthonys that you had in the beginning, you know, from one Anthony to another Anthony,
Mhm.
now that was all accurate, correct?
Oh, yeah.
Now you got to one Anthony where you said you're going to focus on two of his sons. Did he have another son by the name of Henry?
I don't know, Frank, if you know. I
And the
didn't.
reason I'm asking is that most of the Coombeses on Islesboro are descendants of Henry B. Coombs.
Hmm.
And he was listed as being a son of Anthony Jr.
So one of the problems with tracing the Coombeses is that there were Coombs families on Islesboro and Coombs families on Vinalhaven, and many of them tended to name their sons and grandsons and great-grandsons Anthony. So it gets really confusing to separate them all. And even in this latest genealogy, which is basically the first 5 generations of the Coombs family, there were Coombeses that he couldn't find and place in the family, including an Anthony Coombs that I know who married a Murch. I have no idea who it was. So I was focusing on the Coombeses who had a connection to Belfast.
Do you have any idea of the connection to Vinalhaven? Because I have documents here of the Coombeses on Vinalhaven marrying into the merchants of Merchant Island, Merchants Row. And they all moved to Belfast to Union Street.
Yeah.
So it's getting to be a bit of a web that I can't figure out.
I have not researched the Vinalhaven Coombeses at all.
Is it possible that there is another branch of the Coombs that were not part of the French anglicized version?
Yes, we know there was at least the guy who got the land in Marblehead, Mass. So that's we don't know if there's a connection. There were English Coombeses. Yeah, there were English Coombs families who came to the colonies. Yeah. I don't know if they came to Maine, but they came to Massachusetts at a minimum.
Only the DNA knows for sure.
Right.
Good job.
This is,
Wasn't there,
you need to speak into it.
yeah, wasn't there two lines off the island? Anthony and a brother?
Oh, there may well be. I figured I would let the guy doing the genealogy figure all that out.
Oh, okay. My family's from Belfast, and we were led to believe that there was Anthony, who we're descended from, and that there was another line on the island, Islesboro. Omar?
Omar
Mm.
Coombs mentioned in a history of Islesboro
Hmm.
that also came at the same time as Anthony, and I don't know
Okay.
where he is related.
Yep.
But that was a second Coombs
Yep.
that settled.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. And just so you know how closely connected we all are, because Frank and I are both Coombs descendants. His wife, Bobby Clifford, and I graduated from Lawrence High School together.
Is that thing about 5 generations back?